Hi, my name is Jamie Escalante, and this is my presentation on the concept of Cinderella in various adaptations. I genuinely enjoyed this specific project, and I have tons of footage to prove that. However, I'm aware that the presentation I think is capped at about 6 or 7 minutes, so I'm going to go ahead and try to do the best I can to reach that amount or that time frame. So I want to talk about this. To see good rewarded and evil punished, or justice, is rare. Stories, however, pass on the realities not of the everyday world, but of the human heart. One way in which the universal yearning for justice has been kept alive is by the many tales of Cinderella. Indeed, some 1,500 or so versions of the basic Cinderella story type have been recorded so far. In each, the cruel and thoughtless at last get their just reward, as do those who are kind and good. That quote is from the author's note to The Rough-Faced Girl by Rafe Martin David Shannon. That quote really stood out to me, just helped me grasp perspective on the project that I needed. And I also wanted to, before we really begin getting into the details here, I want to introduce a set of 5 elements that we can look to help us understand what the Cinderella story actually is, so that we're able to contrast and compare the various adaptations. And so for this one, I think it starts about here. So let's go ahead and listen here. So the first element that I find is obvious. It is Cinderella itself, I guess we could say, with the representation or introduction of that which is good, innocent, also forbearing and patient. So with the idea of the character and the introduction of that which is good, there's also, which I believe is important to note, a simultaneous forbearance of harm, or a patient undergoing or endurance, perseverance that is exhibited on the part of the representation of good within each adaptation, and which is intrinsic, I believe, to the Cinderella story. So that would, I think, be the first element that I believe is. Second, there is the tension between that which is good and that which is evil, so that which is oppressive, that which is used to manifest the need for justice and vindication, and ultimately points to the injustice that is present. Third, there is the interesting idea of an identifying factor or signifying element that sets the good, quote unquote, apart from all the rest. So there is a consistent separation of that which is good from the other elements in this story, and we'll look at that. Fourth, there is the concept of an active justice, of justice actually pursuing that which is signified as good. Lastly, there is ultimate vindication, or justice. So just a brief overview, again, of the 5 different elements that we'll be using as a framework upon which we'll contrast and compare the 3 adaptations. First, the existence. I think we'll skip the overview. Here they are again, just the elements that make a Cinderella story that kind of were just spoken of, etc. You can kind of view over those real quick. And then we'll jump into the first element that was mentioned, which was the introduction of that which is good into the story. And that in most of the adaptations is the character itself. So herself or his self, but the character of Cinderella. So in Kappa Rushes, in The Rough-Faced Girl, and Yishen, we'll look at their specific characters, what it is about them that makes them this Cinderella type. We'll look at their defining characteristics. So for the Rough-Faced Girl, we have that she's Indian. We have some physical descriptions also, that she is scarred, that her hair is dirty. We see that she endures affliction. So again, we have that aspect of forbearance and patient enduring of affliction. She's humble. We see that in her when she goes to her father to ask for beads, and he gives her shells. She uses them, doesn't push them aside. Depth of insight, we see quite literally that she sees things other people do not. In spite of her affliction and in spite of the torment she endures, she is still confident and still bold. She goes to the invisible being's sister and tells her that she is going to marry the invisible being. And then we find at the end that she is both beautiful inside and out. We find in her an interesting character. She's probably my favorite out of all of the Cinderellas that we have read. And she's independent. She's resourceful. She's quick-witted. She's autonomous. She does things on her own. One interesting characteristic of hers is her stubbornness, which could also be positively interpreted to be strong-willed. After giving her description of her love for her father quite tastefully, and she is removed from her position in her home. She sticks to her guns. She doesn't beg for mercy. She makes it on her own, and when given the opportunity and things come full circle, she shows her father what she meant. She does not back down from who she is, and that is an interesting characteristic of hers that I quite liked. Yishen, also interesting. She is defined by the text as good and kind. We find that she's also loyal and content. One interesting thing I'd like to point out about this specific Cinderella is, or I will do, by describing my favorite part of the story, when she leaves her slipper behind and it is found and furnished to the king, who then wants to have a search for the owner of the slipper, implying he may marry her. Women come out to try on the slipper. Yishen does not. Interesting. Yishen does not. She has no interest in that. Instead, she simply wants the slipper back. It is connected to a good friend of hers, and she has no interest in playing her part in this bacheloresque scheme or scenario, and instead just attempts to get her slipper back for herself. This demonstrates a tremendous loyalty and also a contentment with herself that I find interesting for her. The Rough-Faced Girl, we'll look at the similarities in the 5 elements. So we have the goodness obviously represented in who she is, in her patience. The tension between good and evil is evident in that her sisters are thwarting her. The two girls are making fun of her. The identifying factor here for her would be the knowledge that she has. She has the knowledge of the intimate knowledge that's needed to marry the invisible being, which is unique. And I think that just that insight that she has is sort of likened to something that is providential, something that is akin to maybe a grace that's given to her that could and is, I believe, the element of the act of justice, just the grace and her being able to see things that no one else does, her having that knowledge within herself that ultimately is what sets her apart. I think it's grace that does that for her. And then the ultimate vindication when she marries the invisible being. Differences, the invisible being, the union with nature, this elevation of knowing, I think these are unique to the culture group that's being represented here. And I think that's interesting and also notable. I think that the focus on spirits, the sort of tribal element, I think brings out something unique to this specific story that we don't see in the others. Caparusha is similar, so she, I think herself, the humility that she possesses and demonstrates, and that she goes into servitude to sort of stick to this character of hers. The tension between good and evil would, of course, come with the potential of an impossibility of reconciliation between her and her father, and her father as sort of, in unjustly, but through a misunderstanding, pushing her aside and, telling her she must find her way. The identifying factor I see here, not only her tremendous skill, her mental skill, it seems, and wit that she has, but also quite tangible identifying factor that we see, physical representation of that in the ring that's given to her by the king that sort of sets her apart, and she has that identifying, signifying thing that proves her to be the one. The act of justice, I think, in this case is just a sense of providence. We see the story come full circle at the end, which is entirely providential. Providence let her out, led her to at the place where she begins to serve, and then also to the dances where she meets the master's son. We just see Providence really working on her behalf in this story, and ultimate vindication, which interestingly is not marriage as it is in the others, although that does happen, and we do see the blessing upon the good there, but seems to be the vindication of her own character, in that at the end of the story, there's reconciliation between her father, there's an understanding on his part, he concedes, she remains strong, and they live happily ever after. Quite interesting. The differences we see is she's not a character that's really at the mercy of others, which is different from the other two, where the rough-faced girl and also Yi Shen, they have someone over them, they have a parental figure, they have someone who they are answering to, whereas Caparushes does take on that servile role. However, she's not told she cannot go to the dance. She has this measure of power that that the other two, specifically Yi Shen, does not have, and the other Cinderellas too, which are we have a redefined justice here with her too. As I stated, it's interesting that it seems as though what is vindicated here is her character, as opposed to as a sort of evil or physical, tangible abuse upon her. And then, as was mentioned, she is at no one's mercy, and that is definitely unique to her. For Yi Shen, she definitely is the representation of the good there, the evil, evil stepmother who poses as Yi Shen and murders her best friend. That's quite an extreme act of villainry, is that a word? Should be. Identifying characteristic of Yi Shen, again, there's the signifying factor of the slipper, which is ultimately a representation of her loyalty, I believe, and her good character, but the slipper is what the king is searching for. Act of justice, again, we have the king who's going out searching, he's trying to find the owner of the slipper. And the vindication, where she's married and her mother stoned to death. Quite interesting. Differences here, unique to the specific culture. The fish, that was interesting, that the friendship that we see there is unique to the specific story. We don't see that in Caparushes or the rough-faced girl, but here we see really a story about a friendship, and a friendship whose blessings are long-lasting, and just the unique character that Yi Shen has, I think, is really neat. This is my reflection, which we do not have time to go over, but that is okay. The quote that I read earlier is from the rough-faced girl. Just interesting to think about the yearning for justice within each human heart, and Cinderella. The end.